In a general way, generally, in all its sectors, in all its manifestations, Figueira works very basically with the law of return, which is a regent law in this universe, and with the law of transcendence, which is an auxiliary law. So the work of return and the work of transcending is very basic here. And at this moment, the work of Figueira is being completed, it is being expanded to begin to work more openly with the laws of antimatter. So this forms a group that is going to complete the spiritual center on its inner levels and on its external levels also. On the material plane, it has just been added or conceded to the work a territory that is bigger than F2, physically bigger, beside F2, then completing the field of work in F2. And this part that is being offered to the work represents, on the physical plane, it represents our closer work and more profound work with the laws of antimatter, as we are going to see. Well, the law of return, which is one of the basic laws here and which the whole work is based, this law of return is the one that allows beings of all kingdoms to be moved or to be transported, transmigrated to the destiny that is reserved to them. So here in Figueira, we do not work with the current and known destiny of people. Here in Figueira, we facilitate so that people may fulfill their destiny, their higher destiny, their destiny that is still not known, and which eventually is not yet influencing directly the trajectory of the individual. So if we observe what is happening here, and if we observe the proposal of the work in the spiritual center, we can clearly see that here we try to invoke the energies, the forces, and the possibilities of that which is the true destiny, that which is the life of people on the higher planes and on the planes that have been promised to them before the monad or before the spirit deciding, gradually closing their experiences in matter. So for us to work with the law of return among us and in the spiritual center, it is necessary for our spirits or our monads to be reconducting themselves or returning to their source of origin, to be returning to that which is called the house of the Father, that which is their origin, so that from there this essence may leave to another existence, to another type of existence and another type of evolution. So everything that is carried out here is carried out to collaborate so that this return may take place. Because if the concentration of the individual, if the life of the individual is not turned to this returning to their origin, to this progressively disconnecting from all that which is their current condition. Without this help, this process is very slow. So a spiritual center works as something that dynamizes this process, rather than something that confirms the destiny of people here on the plane where they are, on the plane where they exist. So this law of return is very fundamental here in the work, but it was not yet completed in our action. And now, with this new unfolding, we can openly be working with this additional assistance or complementation of the law of return. And the other law that we work with here, which we work very basically, which is an auxiliary law of the higher law, is this law of transcendence. That is, everything is based on that we may transcend all the mechanisms of the ego, all the mechanisms of the bodies, and that we may gradually go through a process of disconnecting from these mechanisms without ceasing to take care of them, so that we may not become ill. But there is a balance. There is a way to keep the mechanism while it is necessary for the life of the bodies, and for you to gradually dissolve your relationship, your direct relationship with them, so that your entire attention, your whole life, all your energy may begin to dedicate to other mechanisms which are not known to the human consciousness, but which are not the mechanisms of the ego, the mechanisms of the personality. And in this law of transcendence, besides gradually dissolve our entire connection with these mechanisms, also in our daily life, our normal lives here, we must be preoccupied. We must not be worried about security and that which is called comfort, that which is called comfort. So in this law of transcendence, everything is installed according to it, so that you have realized that we have many places here, so that the sense of comfort, of being accommodated, of being relaxed, of luxury may not be installed or may not predominate. So the facilities here are simple, are all the necessary, and we take care to not have anything superfluous, anything that is not necessary, because of the law of transcendence. Otherwise, the mechanisms of comfort, of security, body, personal security become so important to the individuals that the law of transcendence cannot act on them any longer, cannot lead them to other levels that their monads have decided to be at. And in this law of transcendence, we also need, and we are helped to have a state of serenity, because without a certain serenity, or without a work of love for serenity, we won't be able to receive the energies and the stimuli of the transcendent levels. So to have serenity, we are invited here to not deal with many things that make people not being, cause people not to be serene, such as money, personal relationships, affective involvements. All these are things that do not allow serenity, which bring temporary and false serenity, which do not last. So in the law of transcendence, we would have to abolish all of this as much as we can, of course, within the possible limits and even the impossible limits here on the planet Earth, on the surface of the planet Earth. So, through this law of transcendence, if these mechanisms of the personality are gradually abandoned and lives are connected with other mechanisms, more subtle mechanisms, more intuitive mechanisms, if detachment from security, comfort, welfare, material part, relationships, involvements, if all of this is gradually worked upon, or if it's all touched or incorporated, we would then have enough serenity so that the law of transcendence may absorb all our natural part, all our human part, all our temporary part in our overnatural region, in our higher region. So, based on the law of transcendence, if all of this is lived, if all of this is loved, if all of this is searched for, our natural part, our human part, our earthly part, does not stop existing, but it is gradually absorbed, and on its place, the other part begins to radiate, this supernatural part, which is a vibration that is completely different from the natural vibration of a person and the natural movements of a person. So this law of transcendence plus the law of return are fundamental here. They are initial proposals for all those who unite with this task and who unite with the spiritual center. So that this law of return and this law of transcendence may not enter the natural rhythm with which they act on humanity of surface, which is a very slow rhythm. It is a process that lasts hundreds of incarnations, so that for this to be quicker, for this to be more intense in a spiritual center or in an individual who decides to work this by themselves, the basic condition is our not retrogressing, never retrogressing to states that our consciousness has overcome. So if we transcend certain states with our consciousness, there we should be firm and not retrogress with life, not retrogress those states with life. This is basic for the law of transcendence and for the law of return to work openly. So the continuous work, the day to day in a spiritual center like this, is our being very watchful so that we may not retrogress to things, to states, to reactions, to situations that we have transcended with our consciousnesses, that our consciousnesses have overcome. So we need a lot of vigil in life. We need to be very careful, very attentive, because this retrogress to situations, things, movements, attitudes overcome which are overcome by the consciousness. This happens naturally. So you see how important the law of transcendence is together with the law of return in these processes of a spiritual center like this. So, of course, no one bears to keep a rhythm like this if they are not completely available for the work of light, for the work of the higher energy upon themselves, if they are not available so that which from their highest levels may flow over them, over their bodies. Lastly, over this being who is going through this process here. So we were saying that to these two laws begin to be more openly the law of antimatter. We were relating this to this new area that is being added and which is already under our responsibility. It is because we were in need for a place in the consciousness. We already, and on the inner planes, we already have these places. In our consciousness is in the consciousness of the center, but physically and materially, we still did not have a place like this. We didn't have a geography like that, which is being offered to us, which is a place where the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the angelic kingdom, and the elemental kingdom on all planes, on all levels, can work, they can develop their tasks in the best conditions of withdrawal. There are the best conditions of withdrawal that Figueira can offer. There's both as vibration as well as the conditions in which all of that is to be found. Both the presence of the earth in a greater the presence of the land in a greater amount, because we weren't used to have so much land or so much water. So this is a material expansion of elements and elements in certain conditions, because it is practically abundant. So the human vibration, that which are the most material and earthly impulses, stopped stimulating that for some time, and for some time we have been working on these lands as sharers before they were given to us in a different way. So our energy, our offering, our availability was already working there, had already been working there for 3 years. But now there has been a certain transformation, both in our energy placed there as well as in the energy of the area, that all of that was transformed into a sort of sanctuary of these laws of antimatter. So much so that there, from now on, we would have to take care of very much, and be very careful with this work of the planting, and all the works that take place there may take place with the greatest economy, with the greatest divestment from material human subjects and psychological and mental processes, so that this sort of a sanctuary may not be destroyed, may not be disturbed or transformed into an area like all the others. Each area has its own function, as we will see, even within this law of return and this law of transcendence. But there, the law of return and the law of transcendence are so connected with the law of antimatter that there we would really have to keep ourselves in an attitude and in a posture of those who are to be found inside of a sanctuary, inside of a contemplative sanctuary. And there would only be human presence of the group there, except the moments of work and rhythm, of group effort or practical works, but permanent presence of people there only if they are contemplative people. This is a place for contemplative souls. So there can be beings of Figueira lodged there, being stable or not, depending on the possibility for there to be contemplation there. Otherwise, we'll just go there to do our tasks and we'll go back to our areas. This is very important for us, because if this is not carried out with this care, with this rigor, with this vision, we would have a considerable increase of work, of tasks, but it won't have any result for that which the spiritual center has to be in its light. So this is not an increasing of work only. It's not only an increasing of task. This has to be our finally assuming contemplation, our finally assuming the state of being in the law of return, of being in the law of transcendence, totally comfortable with this, without anything to impede us, without anything to attract us to a retrogress, to other situations, to other laws, to things that wouldn't allow the situation, anti-material situation, to be installed in this area, so that Figueira, as a spiritual center, may fulfill the group of its tasks. We are speaking of antimaterial laws because we perfectly know that for the law of transcendence, and by the law of transcendence and by the law of return that we try to live here as entirely as possible at this moment, we know that these laws of antimatter are what allow the universe, the manifested universe, this material universe where we exist, this known universe, for this universe to coexist with its counterpart. Because we live in a universe, but we have our counterpart in another one, which is not a material universe, which is an immaterial universe, which is a formless universe. And by the law of antimatter, these two universes gradually harmonize themselves, they gradually unite until a different sort of balance emerges. And it is the work, the balanced work of our beings in these two sorts of universe which allow our beings, our essences, to really evolve. Because an evolution in this universe, a material evolution, a mental evolution, a spiritual evolution, is an incomplete evolution. It is necessary for this essence that is in this evolution, that is accessible in this universe. It is necessary for this essence to connect itself with the immaterial counterpart of this universe, with an inanimate counterpart of this universe, which is another universe, a part of ours, of the regent below, is entirely turned to this universe. But beyond the regent, beyond the eighth monad, we are in another universe. So, by the laws of antimatter, this is gradually united in us. This is gradually carried out. In us, it means in our regent, in our eighth monad. So when this begins to happen, when this regent, when this nucleus of ours that we can refer as antimaterial, if it's already turned to this, the work of antimatter begins in us. The work of the law of antimatter begins in us. So no spiritual center is complete if it only deals with matter, even if it's spiritual matter. The spiritual center is only complete if it has its polarity, if it has its connection with all the inanimate part, which is another evolution, something else. And this, in the spiritual center, can be represented, it can be symbolized by a physical part of the center, a material part of the center, a concrete part of the center. Everything here that is material universe, everything that is working matter was installed since the beginning, and it is represented by F1. And the entire work in the universe matter, even the most subtle work, even the most spiritual work, was installed since the beginning. So since the beginning, we have been working with the purification of matter in every sense, since the most mental works, the most reflexive works, until the most material works of healing. So everything represented this purification of matter, this transformation of matter. And this was the first thing that was installed. F2 represented the counterpart of this. It represented this contact with antimatter. In F2, there has always been a tendency, and we see there, by the atmosphere, the vibration, there is a tendency for us to be at the other side. But F2 used to have this until a certain point, but it had to work on things relatively with the presence of the monastery, with the presence of the shelter, with the presence of everything that is developed there. He was able to work this materialization until a certain point, but it was lacking another degree. It was lacking an adequate nature. So all the attempts made in F2 of having hermetic retreats were steps, efforts, offerings, but it has never happened. This has not ever happened in F2 to have a hereditary, because all of this is turned to this materialization. All of this is turned to this very subtle antimatter. And now, with the adding the Terras do Sol, lands of the sun, everything is prepared. It is prepared to assume its role of dismaterializer. Of course, within a balance, a harmony, because this process of F1 and this process of F2, which are two opposite processes in Figueira. They are two opposite paths, which are not antagonists, which are not against one another. They are opposite because everything is opposite in us. We have one thing that goes upwards and something that goes downwards. And the point of connection of this, to harmonize all of this, the point of connection to make all of this harmonized and balanced is within the scheme, that which we call F3, very represented physically by the area sewing, which is that whole process of transmutation, that whole process of sublimation, that whole process of being among all this work with matter and this whole work with antimatter. So we are here with the three areas very well defined, very complete, because F3 without sewing could not do anything. F2 without the lands of the sun, terras do sol, could not do anything. So here we have the three states united in a perfect union, depending on us now to be within them very comfortably, and mainly very given of ourselves and very dispreoccupied, very given and very dispreoccupied. So this will develop, each one in their own energy, each one in their own process, always with these very broad limits, these very not rigorous limits, because a process of transmutation or a process of purification or a process of sublimation could be taking place in different degrees in all areas. But this characteristic of purification of matter in F1, this characteristic of transmutation, sublimation in F3, and this characteristic of dismaterialization in F2, this should be very clear for us, very clear within our consciousnesses, so that there may be this process in the most harmonious and balanced way possible. And we should be very balanced and without any worries and any ambitions of any sort, so that our beings, our essences, our bodies may move or may transmigrate from one state to another, from one work to another, or from one area to another, if the physical body also has to move. By dismaterialization represented by F2, by the energy of F2, we do not understand that we will disappear, at least for now, but we will understand that we have the possibility and that we have the elements to begin to experience or to begin to be tested or to begin to come to know the first touches of this antimaterial vibration, the first touches. I don't know if we can call it vibration, but let us say vibration because we don't know any other word in material languages. But these first touches we will be able to come to know, and therefore we will be able to develop within our consciousnesses, and not only our monads or our regent being there occupied with this, because if there is a spiritual center on the physical plane representing this process, it is because beings connected with the spiritual center are carrying out this process. They are doing this process of return. Not only return to our source, but really a more profound return, that is diving into this counterpart of this whole evolution that has happened so far. These things are being said because a member of Figueira began to have these experiences. He began to perceive these touches, these anti-material touches. He began to perceive certain things. And we are seeing that this is very balanced because seemingly he is a being just like others. He is a being who perhaps even more than us, so well integrated into the material universe. So we have contemplative souls here, so that eventually they may be there polarizing or leading the prayerful part or developing the contemplative lineage there on those lands. As this one is certainly working, because this person is certainly working like this as a soul. But as an external being, as an incarnated individuals, perhaps we can collect in the group enough beings so that there may be this experience, this such a delicate experience, I repeat, from the standpoint of the energy and from the standpoint of nature, the standpoint of the local geographic standpoint of vibration, of harmony. There's nothing lacking there. So now, with our becoming aware of this, being aware of this, having this clear, so here there can happen a miracle of that also being inhabited. Our particles, both our material, denser, as well as etheric and mental, all this world of ours connected to this evolution has the possibility of being more subtle. They have the possibility of tuning up more with higher evolution and with this other part, with this other counterpart, which we can speak of openly now, because if the physical place has manifested, there is no reason for us to be only working on evolution. Otherwise, this place has been given to the wrong hands. So there is no reason for us not to open these horizons for these beings who are in connection with this, who are connected with this. I'm not only considering the beings who are consciously incarnated, but I'm also considering mainly the beings and essences who are disincarnated and who are part of this and who are throughout the planet. These beings are throughout the planet, trying inner connections, connections on the spiritual field. But I don't know if only the spiritual laws are enough here to connect, to unite this great network of essences. Perhaps only the spiritual laws are not enough. The spiritual laws do almost everything, or everything for us. But for this work, the laws of antimatter are necessary. Unknown laws are necessary, which are not visible, which are not experienced with these same senses and with this same consciousness of ours. So this proposal, this initial proposal of having this detachment and having this decision of letting go all the mechanisms of this mind, of this ego, letting go really letting this go, and all our decision of being in the law of return, decided to go back to our origin, to a part of ours to be very comfortable in another evolution, because this is a balance of two universes which we have to collaborate with. We are no longer here to collaborate in the construction of this universe. The great spirits, the great entities have done this. This universe is built. Here we need to unite this universe with its inexistent counterpart. And for this, we really need to be decided on all planes. And if this is being proposed, it's a sign that on the most internal planes, there's already something of ours there in this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have received this gift in a moment that no one was thinking of this or expecting or had any ambition. So this came just to show us, look at what you have to work at, consciously work. This is a clear sign of the vitality of a spiritual center, and that our human consciousness, our more earthly part, our most material or mental part, would have to accompany, would have to follow, would have to recognize, so that the process of the spiritual center may develop with its maximum harmony and within the proposal. The proposal that as we lead ourselves along the path, and as we confirm ourselves on the path, the proposal that is being unveiled for us. Because this is gradually unveiled. Our path is gradually shown. The tasks are gradually shown. And we should have to remain watchful, attentive, so that this material side of ours, this mental side of ours, may at least not oppose resistances, may at least collaborate. Because then these particles will have another rhythm. They will become more subtle, with a different rhythm, with a different intensity. And in this, of course, we have a particular energy of a rescue center, because all of this is the rescue of beings. But it is a much more profound rescue, because if a soul or if a monad is already rescued, the task of the rescue center has not ended, because now it has to enter this, it has to rescue its essence for another life, for another evolution, for the counterpart of this universe, where all of this has already been saved, because here our being is already rescued. But it is already in the process of rescue to go through this other immaterial counterpart of this universe, that is antimatter, is rescuing us. And the spiritual center, as it becomes conscious of this, could mean a greater evolution for all beings and for all essences connected to it, because the spiritual center as an entity is perfectly aware of this. The hierarchies that work in the spiritual center are perfectly aware of this. Now, if this consciousness descends down to the mind and mainly down to the hearts of all its members, then the work of the spiritual center will be much more complete, will have been completed much more. But balance must be managed to be reached. Of course, without activity, we don't build things on the physical plane. But here these laws must be so welcomed that there we will have an activity that is not activity. It doesn't mean that we won't be active. It means that our activity should be permeated with a different substance. Because there is no activity that is more intense than contemplation, but it is different. It's something different. It's another field. And all of this has been exposed because of this that this person shared. This person who is already living these things, even on the etherical field. We should become used to opposites, because if we are in matter and should dive into or plunge into antimatter, we should say absurd things like this. We have many things to do, but people who are not active should be there. So here we need security, but no one should think about security this. So we should be used to these things. Otherwise, how are we going to move into antimatter? So is this here and this there? There is no contrast, are both things at the same time. If you say at the same time that you foment a security sector and no one should think about security, this is an antimatter universe that is making pressure for us to resolve things. For everything to be resolved within each universe. Now, if in this universe, this material universe, there is something lacking to be resolved, that it doesn't merge with the other. It's necessary that here things may be resolved. So when we speak of security, activity, when we speak of everything, we are speaking in a different sense, which does not exclude this one. It just merges into this. It only unites with this and gives something else, which the regent knows what it has to go, what the point it has to reach. This is the path of the regent, which is being placed to us in a very visible way. Because many of us could now on be placed in completely incomprehensible situations of you're doing one thing and being another and vice versa. And then is this pressure that is beginning to happen. It is this attraction that is beginning to emerge.